All right, so we are going to just flip through some basic geomechanical concepts because you know that this aspect of hydraulic fracturing is controlled by geomechanics, right? Because you know that you are fracturing,
That's very
you are fracturing the rock above the fracture pressure. So before you can even carry out hydraulic fracturing, you must have done some kind of geomechanical analysis to know the the direction of the stresses in that particular area, because they are basically three principal stresses direction. So you have to know which direction is our maximum stress. Where do we have our maximum horizontal or maximum or minimum horizontal or vertical? Vertically definitely is always in a vertical direction, so you don't have to stress about that. All right. So one thing that we have to also look at when we want to analyze the geomechanical situation of the rock is to consider what we call the lithostatic gradient, which arise definitely from what we call the lithostatic stress. The lithostatic stress is the stress of the overlying material, the pressure that the overlying material exerts on top of the reservoir. That's what we call our lithostatic stress. And that lithostatic stress is definitely always acting vertically downward. Then we have the hydrostatic gradient, which is the gradient of the fluid column, the gradient exerted by the fluid column. That's what we call the hydrostatic gradient. Now, between the two of them, we have the fracture gradient. The fracture gradient definitely depends on so many factors. It doesn't depend only on, like here we have the weight of the overlying material, here we have the weight of the water column. It doesn't depend only on it. So we have our fracture gradient that depends on so many factors. And for you to achieve hydraulic fracturing, you have to exert a pressure that is definitely greater than the fracture pressure before you can exert that. So normally we can see the various approximate values of the various lithostatic gradient. Lithostatic gradient is approximately 1 psi per foot, which means that for every 1 foot, we have an increase in pressure of 1 psi. That's what it simply means. And then for the hydrostatic pressure, for every 1 foot, we have an increase in pressure of 0.45 psi. I hope you are with me.
Yes, sir, I'm with you,
All
sir.
right. When a material is stressed, like what we have here, if you apply a vertical force on this material, what happens is that the material shrinks. The material shrinks both in the x direction. It reduces its size both in the x direction, then it expands in the y direction. Since the pressure is coming in this direction, I'm just calling this one x direction, right? But in real term, it could be
Yeah,
any direction. It could be any direction. It must not be
yeah,
x here to illustrate. So if this is our x direction, if you stress it in this direction, as since you're applying the force in that direction, it reduces in that direction, then it expands in this other direction. That one is logical, right?
yes, yes.
Yeah,
That's true.
so because normally something like a foam, if you hold something like a foam and you squeeze it, as you're squeezing it, it is reducing in the direction in which the stress is applied, but it increases in the other directions in which there is no stress. Those other directions, we may call
Yes,
it the minimum stress direction. Those directions are the minimum stress direction. So if we have this, we realize that after the force must have been applied, there is a change in the x direction, which we call delta x. And also there is a change in the y direction. So if this is our original y direction, the change is going to be y plus delta y. Since the change in the y direction is an increase, since that is not the direction in which the force is acting. But if you want to calculate a change in this direction, it's going to be x minus delta x, because there is a reduction
yes.
in volume in that, there is a reduction in size in that particular direction. So we have to calculate what we call our stress. Our stress is the force per unit area, which generally we may just say is pressure, But in this case, we are not just calling it pressure, we call it stress because it is directed in a particular direction. It is directed in a particular direction. Then we have strain. We have strain in the x direction, and then we have strain in the y direction. The strain is the change in the length divided by the original length. That is a change. This is a change.
Yeah.
This is a change in the length divided by the original length. Then for the change, also the strain in the y direction, the change in the y direction divided by the original length in the y direction. Then this is a very important aspect also, which we call the Poisson ratio. The Poisson ratio. The Poisson ratio is when we look at what this E is strain. This E, what we have here is strain in the y direction. This is strain in the x direction, and then this is the strain in the y direction. So the Poisson ratio is a ratio of the strain in the y direction divided by the strain in the x direction. So if I apply pressure, what is the ratio of the change in the x direction with respect to the y direction? That's what Poisson ratio is, and it's a very important aspect when it comes to geomechanics. So they have given us some various values of this Poisson ratio for sandstone that is occupied by gas and one of liquid limestone and shale. They are giving these values because generally these are the various lithology that we expect to see in a normal sedimentary basin where we have hydrocarbon. In normal sedimentary basin where we have hydrocarbon, we expect to see all of these one or two of these, because definitely we'll have shale, which is our source rock. But in some cases, what other source rock do we have apart from shale?
We have carbonates, right?
All right. So carbonates can also act as source rock and it acts as reservoir rocks, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have limestone. Limestone acts as a reservoir rock, like in the Gulf of Mexico. We have limestone there that is acting as a source rock. The main source rock in the Gulf of Mexico is limestone. That's the main source rock. But in that same basin, it is still acting as a reservoir rock. That means we have is a limestone deposit that is rich in organic material. That becomes our source rock, right?
Yeah.
But you have in a situation where there is no organic material there and it is highly fractured, so it acts as our reservoir rock. Even in the Middle East, majority of the reservoir rock in the Middle East is limestone. It's not sandstone. We have sandstone mostly around this area. In the Middle East, majority of the reservoir rock there is limestone. Are we okay with that?
Yes.
All right. So we know that there's another parameter also which we can talk of is the Young modulus. You know that when you stretch a material, the material expands, but it gets to a point where if you release the material, it cannot retain its original size. At that point, we now say that material has probably exerted its elastic limit, because immediately the material goes beyond its elastic limit, it now becomes what we call plastic, because it can still expand if you stress it, but immediately you allow it, it cannot go back to its original size. So you already know definitely about Hooke's law, right?
Yes.
Yeah, when the material obeys Hooke's law, it lies in this region. If you allow it, it goes back to its original size. But beyond this region, the material becomes plastic. If you allow it, it doesn't go beyond it, or it doesn't go back to its original size. So this is our elastic regime, and this is the plastic regime. And it gets to a point where if you overstress the material now can no longer be behaving like plastic, it cracks. So this is the area where we may now start be talking of what we call fracture pressure. This is where we can now be talking of fracture pressure. And Young modulus now is how much energy is required to deform a rock, and it is calculated as stress all over strain. Calculated as stress all over strain. So all of these things, we are just mentioning them. All right. So this is an example of how a hard rock and a soft rock behave in terms of hydraulic fracturing and in terms of the stress-strain relationship. in terms of the hydraulic fracturing and stress strain relationship. So you realize that for this particular curve, this one has a very high gradient and this one has a smaller gradient, and this represents the hard rock. And if you have to perform hydraulic fracturing in a hard rock, you expect that it is possible for the fracture to extend very deep into the rock. But if you are performing hydraulic fracturing in a soft rock, it is difficult for the fracture to perform, to go right, because as you are applying stress on the material, instead of the material to fracture, the material is now behaving as if it is plastic in nature. It stresses to a certain point, immediately the pressure is released, it comes back, it reduces, it comes back to it, maybe not the original position because it is plastic in nature, but it doesn't crack. So a soft material is very easy, very difficult to crack more than a hard material. I'm sure that one is understandable, right?
Yes, yes.
So should I take it over again?
It's very understood.
All right.
It's like, it's more like the difference between a stone and maybe a rubber, a thick rubber. For a rubber to really fracture, to break, is really difficult
It's
compared
really
to a
difficult.
stone.
Voila. But I'm sure you take a stone, maybe you hit a hammer on it, easily fractures.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
you have to apply a lot of stress for you to be able to fracture a soft material. So most of the time, if you do, because all of this also is going to control, because these are things that you have to understand before you start building the model. Because the model is what you are in, the model is designed is in a way that the parameters that you have put in. The model is asking you questions at the beginning. What is this? What is the property of this? What is this? What is this? What is this? What is this value? The values that you put in now will determine how the model will be at the end of the day. So they now tell you that for you to actually perform hydraulic fracturing in this particular area, you need maybe a pumping stress of this. You need, and the fracture has to be in at these are the various the dimension of the fracture that you're definitely going to have at the end of the day, depending on the parameters that you inject into it at the end of the day. Are you okay with that?
Yes, yes, I'm okay.
All right. So there are various ways in which a material may deform. There are various ways in which a material may deform when stress is applied onto it. Either it changes shape or it changes size. Are we okay with that? Hello? Hello? Is the network breaking?
Well, I wasn't getting you from when you said that. Are we okay with that? I say yes. You didn't.
Okay, I said
Maybe it's a
there
network.
are various ways in which a material reacts when stress is applied. Either it changes shape or the size changes.
Yes.
I'm talking and asking like that because I know that my network will be a little bit slow. That's why I'm asking you if you're getting.
Yeah, I'm getting you, sir. I'm getting you, sir.
All right. So we have talked about changing size. Now I want to talk about changing shape. And shear modulus is a measure of the ability of the material to change shape when a stress is applied onto it. When the stress is applied onto it. So you realize that if you apply a force, F here, so you see that if I apply a force here, the material changes shape, and the distance of change is x, and the angle of change is what we call theta. So our shear modulus, if we look at what we have here, this one now is not what we have here. If you look at what we have here, this is the normal stress. This is normal stress, right? Normal stress is equal to force all over area. But in this case, it is shear stress. Shear stress is equal to force all over area. Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm with you, sir. I'm with you, sir.
Okay, okay. But the network is break. Is the network breaking?
No, I'm getting you clearly. I'm
All
getting you
right.
clearly.
So I said the shear stress here is equal to force over area. So this is a symbol of shear stress. And then this now is the shear strain, which is the change in shape. In the other case, the normal strain now is the change in size. But this is the shear strain. And the shear strain is the same as tan theta. So here, what we have here as G is the shear stress divided by the shear strain. And if you put all of these together, this is what we have. And it can easily be estimated using G is equal to the Young modulus all over. This is the Poisson ratio. So this is the formula that you can easily use to estimate our shear stress. All right. So normally, if a normal situation in which a rock exists within the reservoir, you have a situation where forces are acting in different directions. Forces are acting in different directions. If this is a cube that exists within that particular reservoir, on each face of the cube, we have three different forces acting in three different directions. So we have the normal force that's acting in that direction, and then we have the shear stress, the normal stress acting perpendicular to the surface. Then we have the shear stress that is acting parallel to the surface, and all of these stresses are perpendicular to each other. So normally we can always use that to form what we call a stress tensor. To form a stress tensor. So all of these are in different directions. This is our x2 direction, x1 direction, and x3 direction. In another area, they may talk of x, y, and z. So all of these are the stresses, S1. So we may have S1, this is S1 acting in the X1 direction. We have S1 acting in the X2 direction, and then we have S1 acting in the X3 direction. So normally, if the system is orthogonal, like what we have here, we are going to assume, they always assume that all the shear stresses are zero. If you assume that all the shear stresses are zero, then we have only three stress, S1, S2, and S3, and these three stresses are what we call the principal stresses. The principal stresses. So this is exactly what I'm already explaining. Then we may have the principal stresses sigma x, sigma y, and sigma z. Now, if you have our normal system, I said there are three principal stresses. If we are assuming that the system is orthogonal like this, then all the shear stresses are zero. If all the shear stresses are zero, then the normal stresses are what is going to operate, which is the x1, x2, and x3. So we all agree that in a normal system, we have three principal stresses. So these are the three principal stresses. We have one, which is the overburden stress, and then we have two stresses in the horizontal direction. We have the maximum horizontal stress, then we have the minimum horizontal stress. So generally in a system, we have the maximum stress, the intermediate stress, and the minimum stress. We already know between these two horizontal stresses that this one is greater than this, but we don't know what is happening with the overburden stress. There may be a situation where the maximum horizontal stress is greater than the overburden stress, and there may be a situation where the overburden stress is greater than the maximum horizontal stress. Are you with me?
I'm with you, sir.
All right. So the only clear one we know for now is these two. We already know that this one in red is greater than this because this one is maximum and this one is minimum. All of them are horizontal, but we don't know for sure what the overburden stress is. The overburden stress may be greater than this, and this one may be greater than the overburden stress. In different situations, we are going to have hydraulic fracturing that is moving in different directions. So we say hydraulic fracturing will initiate and propagate with the least energy. So hydraulic fracturing propagates perpendicular to the direction of minimum principal stress. That's the reason why we are studying all of this, because you have to know all of these directions. for you to fully understand the hydraulic, how hydraulic propagation will take place, you have to understand, you have to know precisely where our minimum stress, principal stress direction will be. So this is exactly what I am explaining. If you have the overburden stress and you have to perform hydraulic fracturing, it's going to propagate in the direction of maximum horizontal stress, then it's going to open up in this direction. As it is propagating in this direction, the width is opening up in this direction. So it moves in that direction, then it opens up in the direction of the minimum horizontal stress. So we say fracture will propagate in the direction of sigma maximum and perpendicular to sigma minimum. So this is perpendicular, this is the minimum direction, and then this is where the fracture is going. So the minimum horizontal stress is actually perpendicular to the surface of hydraulic fracturing. So we now say fracture opens up perpendicular to the minimum stress or in the direction of maximum stress. Is that one clear enough?
Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. All of these things are things
sir,
that I
if I
expect
understand
you have to
that-
understand them fully, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, because all
Yes,
of
I
these things,
understand.
if
I
you are
understand
doing
them.
this
I
defense
understand
in
them.
front of someone that understands all of these concepts, the person will not only ask about hydraulic fracture, but is going to test your knowledge in all of this. So it was necessary for us to dodge it a little bit. So that's what I'm talking about. It propagates in that direction and then it opens up in the x direction. So as it is moving in this direction, it is gradually opening up in the minimum direction, because that direction there we have a very little force that's acting in that direction, so it can easily open up itself in that particular direction. Now, if we have a situation where, look at what we have here, the overburden stress, what is it saying?
Least principal stress.
No, the overburden stress is the least principal stress, right? So it means that the maximum horizontal stress is greater than the overburden stress. This situation is a situation where hey, my battery is low. Let me connect before it goes off. Are you getting me? Hello. That network is really disturbing. Hello?
Yes.
Resume.
Yes.
So what I'm saying here is that if we have a situation where the maximum horizontal stress is greater than the overburden stress, this is the direction in which the fracture is going to propagate. That's the reason why it is very, very important for you to understand the stress system of that reservoir. So these are the various scenarios that we may have. These are the various scenarios that we may have in a manner in which the fracture is going to propagate based on the vertical stress, the maximum horizontal stress, and the minimum horizontal stress. You are going to have different phenomena. The fracture will propagate in this direction if I have a situation where the vertical stress is maximum. So you see how the fracture is propagating in the direction of the maximum stress, and then it opens up in the direction of the minimum stress. So you are going to look at these various situations. So these various situations are things that you can also do it as part of your pre-knowledge and explain it also to show the various direction in which the various fracture is going to propagate based on your maximum horizontal stress, based on the vertical stress, maximum horizontal stress, and the minimum horizontal stress. All right, so that's just the basic of geomechanics that I wanted to give. Are you saying you're getting me right? Let me continue.
Yes, I'm getting you very well, sir.
All right. So the next thing we are going to look at now is the propant. We know that definitely for us to have a very good fracture system, we need to inject the propan into the pore space, into the fracture that has been created, so that the propan should be able to keep the fracture open. Because if you fracture the system and you don't put a propan there, in less than no time, due to the stress of the overlying material and the stresses acting in different directions, the fracture is going to close up. So we need a material that we can inject into the fracture so that it should be able to hold up, to hold the fracture or keep the fracture open. That's what we call a propan. So this is a propan. A propan, we have different types of propan which you are going to see. Propan ensures that the created fracture remain open. So we have different types of propan, and we have different sizes. So we have the mesh size, we have 12/18, 12/20, and all of that. So we have 20, we take for example this 12/40, the 20/40, sorry. The 20 means that it can pass through a 20 mesh, and 40 means it will be filtered by 40 mesh. You have to understand that the 20 is greater than the 40. You are not looking at the value. You have to go and recall what mesh is, right?
Hello, sir.
Yes. Are you getting me?
Hello, sir.
Yes. Network. Anyway, what I'm explaining here is that the 20 mesh is greater than the 40 mesh. So you have to go and recall all of these. All right. So we have different types of propans. We have the white sand, which is more rounded than the brandy sand, which is more rounded than the brandy sand. Then you have natural sands that have also been used for hydraulic fracturing, like that one that is obtained from the Arkansas River sand. We have the Canadian and the West Texas sand. These ones are natural sands that are very cheap to obtain. And then we have also sands that are very, very strong, which are more or less synthetic sands that have been produced, like the ceramic sands, and we have the high strength ceramic sands, and they have the ISP ceramic. These ones are very, very tough but expensive because they are more or less synthetic sands that have been produced. But this is more rounded. And we are going to see how the shape of the sand determines the permeability at the end of the day. So if I have a system, for example, want to look at how the grain size affects the permeability. If you look at all of this, you're going to realize that as you're moving from higher grain to lower grain, you realize that the permeability is actually reducing. This one is high grain, is large grains, large grain sand. Now you are moving from large grain to smaller grain. I see when it comes to a mesh system, the smaller value signify larger grain size than the larger value. So here, when we talk of 12/20, the 12 is actually bigger and the 20 is smaller. So when the grain size is becoming smaller, it's also affecting the permeability. And then we also talk of size distribution. Size distribution is, are you having a uniform size there, or you're having variation in sizes? In a geologic term, they may use the word sorting. If it's well sorted, it means that they have uniform sizes. The sizes are almost of the same size. When it is poorly sorted, you have a situation where you have smaller grain size mixed up with larger grain size. So for a situation where we have a one size distribution, we may have a porosity of 45%, but when we have this situation where the sizes of the propan is unevenly distributed, we may have a porosity of less than 30%. So it becomes an advantage for us to have larger grains and we have uniformly distributed grain size. Are you getting me? All right.
Yes, I'm getting you, sir.
All right. So the ferricity and the roundness of the propan also affects the permeability. At the end of the day, the one is shaped like this. This is a shape like this. That is probably well rounded, having a roundness of 0.9 and having a sphericity of 0.9. So when it is at this particular level, it gives us the best result. Because if we have a situation where it is well-rounded, let me come back to the, we have a situation where it is well-rounded, like this is a situation, the stress in that particular fracture is evenly distributed on all the particles. But if you have a situation where the particles are not well-rounded, the stress distribution is not the same on all particles. If the stress distribution is not the same, it now produces local stresses within that particular fracture. Those local stresses that is produced in those particular fracture, it doesn't give us the best porosity or permeability. It doesn't give us the best permeability. Let's talk about permeability. So in this particular case, we expect a good value from here. As you're moving away from this value to this value, you're having better permeability. So this is a term of permeability against the. Also, we could also talk about closure stress. This one is about closure stress. And the closure stress also is determined by each of all of these parameters. This closure stress is what we call the minimum horizontal stress. We are going to see all of that. So the strength of the material also determines the permeability. High strength material is going to have high permeability, while low strength material is going to have low permeability. And the low strength material is the natural sand that I just talked about. I mentioned the natural, I mentioned
Yes, sir.
stereotypes of propan that may be used. All of these ones are natural sands, and this one are synthetic. The synthetic are more tougher than the natural sand. All right.
Yes.
And then when it comes also to fracturing fluid, we know that definitely we have to always mix the propan with fluid. If you don't mix the propan with fluid, then there is no way the propan will carry itself right into the reservoir. So you have to mix the propan with the fluid so that the fluid can carry the propan into the fracture that have been created. So what type of fluid do we need, and what's the objective of the fluid? The objective is to deliver the propan into the formation. That's the objective of the fluid. And the fluid, what are the various properties? It needs to have the right viscosity, because if it is too thick, it will be difficult to move. If it is too light, also, it is not an advantage also. So it needs to have the right viscosity for it to transport the propan from the surface right into the reservoir. And then it should be non-damaging. It should be easy to make. It should have low fluid loss, low friction also, because it has to move from the surface into the tubing and right into the reservoir. Since it is moving into the tubing, it has friction. There must be a frictional force that exists between the fluid and the tubing. So we need a fluid that has a very low frictional force, so that the velocity of the fluid will not be reduced by the friction between the fluid and the tubing. Then it's easy to break, environmental friendly and economic. So all of these ones are just minor things that I'm just explaining. So apart from the water and the propan, we also have different chemicals that also have to be added into it. We have scale inhibitor, we have pH adjustment agent, we have the potassium chloride that is used, which is an anti-clay swearer. It prevents clay from swelling. KCl prevents clay from swelling. We also have the gelling agents and all of that. So we have different parameters that also have to be added into all of the mixture, because water and the propan will give us about 99.51%, but there are some other small chemicals that are additive. Have you looked at the book I gave?
Yes, sir, I've looked at it.
All right, so go on.
Yeah, and I saw.
Go on that additive, right?
Yes, sir.
And look at the various types of additive. These are the various types of additive that we have mentioned, and see the advantage of each of those additives. What do they do? What is the effect of that particular any additive on the system? Are you okay with that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. So at the beginning, what was mostly used was the oil-based fluid that was mostly used at the beginning, which was around 1949. That was when this idea of hydraulic fracture came up. But as time went on, the people were now moving away from the oil-based and they were now moving into what? Water-based. Why? Because water is easily available, it's economical, it is safe, right? But why oil is what? Oil is expensive, even though it is less
Yeah.
damaging to clay, because water destroy clays. Oil is less damaging to clays, but water has more advantage than oil because it is safe and easily available and economical. You know, the essence of any operation in the oil company is to do what? To optimize profit. So they have to look at the best possible way to reduce the cost, and using water is one of the best possible ways to reduce cost. All right, so we are not going to our next class now. We are going to talk about fracture model and design. I think we should have this class tomorrow morning where the network is very good, because this is where their work is.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we have the class tomorrow morning where network is very good, because that is where the bulk of your work